live from Israel. And in case you haven't noticed, for the past year and like 8 months or so, this country's been at war. In fact, it was a year and 8 months yesterday to the day, right? It was October 7th, and yesterday was June 7th. So, this country remains fighting a war against Hamas and other groups of illicit ne'er-do-wells in Gaza and elsewhere. And these groups are funded either, Hamas funds a bunch of smaller groups, and Hamas itself is funded by Iran. All other groups also take funding from Iran and from Qatar, just like Hamas does. And this battle has been raging. This war has been raging, of course, longer than since before October 7th. But on that day, this phase of the war broke out. Right, this war that started October 7th with a brutal invasion into Israel, in which more than 800 civilians and 400 soldiers were brutally killed in the most horrific ways. And other awful things were done, especially to women and girls, and even old ladies. Just absolutely horrific. Hundreds of people were taken hostage into Gaza. People don't remember, there were more than 7,000 wounded people on that day in Israel. It's not just, yes, they survived for the most part, right? They survived. But the actual casualty count, right, of dead and wounded, right, was well over 8,000 people. In a country the size, of like, say 10 million people roughly. It was getting close to 10 million at the time. Wasn't quite there, but you say just 10 million to round it up. Right, that's a not negligible portion in one day. Right, it's as if more than 100,000 people or something easily were hurt in the U.S. Hurt and or lost their life on one day. It makes 9/11 look like chump change, which it wasn't. 9/11 was absolutely catastrophic and horrific. Right? But in terms of proportion of the damage to the proportion of the country, population-wise, right, it was 3,000 people out of more than 300 million people at the time. So a very small percent, thank goodness, but still absolutely horrific and catastrophic and devastating. And in Israel, it was, more than 1,200 dead and another 7,000 wounded. Just like there were obviously many wounded in 9/11, there were, more than 5,000 people or 10,000 people wounded in 9/11 who survived, thank God. But many of them survived with lasting problems, and many of them have since died because of the problems. So they are also victims of 9/11, especially the first responders who went there, the firefighters, policemen, paramedics, who literally ran into the towers as they were falling, and they ran in to save people. Many of them lost their lives, but even those who didn't, from the smoke and everything else, the pollution, they came out, they got wounded. Many of them died from that stuff later, from horrible, horrible conditions that they suffered for many, many years. And many of them are still sick with those conditions and will be for the rest of their lives. Right? And also that happened to construction workers and firefighters and rescue teams that were, involved in clearing out the rubble, trying to rescue people while the buildings were literally still smoking and with fire, and they were trying to rescue people, find anybody they could. Anyway, why am I talking about that event? Because this war still rages, just like 9/11. The towers are still burning. These towers are still burning here in Israel until the hostages are home, until the Hamas gives up power so that they can never do this again. This war can't end, unfortunately. No, in theory it could, if Israel were to say, you know what, just keep the hostages and stay in power because we're not going to worry about you doing this again, even though you've literally said a million times since then you're going to do it over and over and over and over again. And you said that what happened that day was legitimate resistance. If that's what, if raping people is legitimate resistance, I don't know what to tell you. You're a savage. You're not a civilized human being, right? And I don't like to use that word savage, but if you really believe it's okay to do that to women or anybody, you're not a civilized human being. And as far as I'm concerned, listen, all lives may be equal in value, but they're not. They're not. If you believe that you could do that to people, you're not equal in value. You're just not. Like, if that's a belief you actually hold dear in your heart, and you've thought about it, and you've intellectualized it, and you've found reasons to justify it, you're not of equal value, in my opinion. I don't care. We can say, yeah, we should all have equal rights. Yeah, we should all have equal rights. That also means that if you violate those rights, if you violate the rights of others in such a way, guess what? You can lose some of your rights, right? Just like you can lose the right to vote, right? Well, in war, if you do terrible things, you can lose the right to exist. If the army has decided, if the government has decided that the army is going to end you, and if you've done something terrible like that, it's hard to see any other way. If you've used that as a weapon, and they have, right? When you use sexual assault as a weapon in war, and then you do other horrible things like mutilation of people in, on their various organs, and you do it on purpose to violate them and demean them and dehumanize them and all these other horrible things that you do. And you do it in front of their loved ones, in front of their husbands, in front of their children, and then you kill them in the most horrific ways. And then you booby trap their bodies by inserting explosives in certain parts of their bodies. It's the most gruesome, horrific things were done on October 7th, and that is why there has been a mind shift in the Israeli psyche that, no, we're not allowing this to go unpunished. We're not allowing this to happen without such a severe response that they will never do it again. Now, the problem is, like I literally said on October 7th, while Bibi Netanyahu was speaking, I said, this war is not going to end the way people think. And right now we're seeing that happen. Right now we're seeing Israel fighting the PR battle and losing when it comes to food aid. They think they're winning, but they're not. Right? They think they're winning because they're saying, well, look, all these lies about the about the food aid being, just opportunities for Israel to kill more Palestinians coming to get food. But in fact, it's the Hamas killing the Palestinians. Nobody hears that second part. All they hear is IDF is killing people coming to get food aid. That's all they hear. They don't bother to hear the erratum. They don't bother to hear the but in fact second part of the sentence. Nothing. None of that. Israel is losing the PR war massively. Why? I'll tell you why. There's a number of reasons. First of all, Israel has always sucked at PR. Part of the reason is we have this mindset that it doesn't matter what Israel says or what people think about Israel. It matters what Israel does. And that's true. It does matter what Israel does. And it doesn't matter that we get everyone's acceptance before we do it. However, a country is bigger than just one mindset. We can do two things at the same time. We can both win the PR war and also win the facts on the ground. There's no reason not to do both. And yes, you can make the argument that, well, if we would just focus on the victories on the ground, then we would also win the admiration of the world. Yeah, that's all good. That's all well and good. But like I said, you can do both things at the same time, right? You can be out there with a very successful PR. And the problem is, Israelis think that they know PR. Like Israeli Sabras who grew up in Israel and lived their whole life here, even if they studied in America for 4 years, those are the worst ones because then they think they understand American PR. You don't understand American PR if you just went to college there in America. You don't understand American. You don't understand American PR. You haven't lived the culture your whole life. You don't understand it. You haven't spent 10, 20, 30 years there. You don't get the mindset. You might think you get the mindset, but you don't. The second thing is you're bringing on the wrong people. That's part of winning the PR battle. You're bringing on the wrong people. You want to bring on the right people? Bring on Mizrahi Jews. Look, I'm half Mizrahi, half Ashkenazi. They'll never bring me on, and I'm as white as they come, right? I am white, obviously, but I'm half North African. I'm half African. Can you tell? Right? My descendants, my parents were born in Europe and in Africa. Can you tell? So they'll never bring me on. If they won't bring me on, think about anybody who actually looks, browner, right? And they don't bring them on. Why? Which is a shame, by the way, because not bringing on lots and lots of great spokesmen that Israel actually has that we can use to tell our story are brown. You know why? Because most of Israel is brown, right? Brown or black. This is not a white country. You might think it is, because most of the people you've heard from Israel happen to be white. But this country is not mostly white. This country is 60% brown or black. 60%. 6 out of 10 people here are brown or black. And there's another little percentage that are not white also. So whites don't even make up the full 40%. Right? It used to be, when this country was founded, before we had all of the Jews coming here because they got kicked out of Arab countries, before we had all the Jews, the Mizrahi Jews, the North African Jews, the Sephardi Jews, before they all came here, immediately after between 48 and 1960, let's say, even after that, but especially during that time. In the first 12 years or so of Israel's existence, about 1 million Jews came here, almost 1 million Jews came here from Arab-dominated lands and Muslim-dominated lands, right? Because they'd been kicked out. Why? Because Israel existed. Because Israel was created. So people, escaped Iraq, escaped Syria, escaped Yemen, escaped Morocco, escaped Egypt, escaped Libya, escaped you name it. Name an Arab country that they lived in, Lebanon, Jordan, wherever they were, they escaped and came to Israel. And I say escaped because in many cases they literally had to escape, like by cover of darkness, secretly, and all that kind of stuff. And they found their way here, this little strip of land that was their new homeland, and they gave them safe refuge to be who they are, right? And they went from being a relative minority in Israel to being the majority very quickly. And I bet you didn't even know that. In this country, there's a high-tech capital of the world that does all these amazing things in research and development for biotechnology, for pharmaceuticals, for life-saving medicines, life-saving medical devices, right? Cybersecurity, software, consumer software, business software, SaaS startups, tech startups. Israel has more unicorns per capita than any country on earth, bar none. I think it's like the second or third, maybe the fourth, but I think it's definitely among the top 4 countries in the world. I think it might be number 2. I don't remember. The second or third or fourth highest number of unicorns in the world. If you don't know, a unicorn is a startup that has a valuation pre-IPO of $1 billion or more. It's like the United States, and Israel, or maybe the United States and then India and then Israel, something whatever. It's either number 2, 3, or 4. It's crazy how high it is, and it's a country that has a population of 10 million compared to like India with 1.5 billion people, or America with 400 million people, and the world's largest economy. You know, somehow Israel has more unicorns than every other country except those two. Right? That's crazy, right? And this tiny little country is still fighting for the release of its hostages, alive and dead. Yesterday, the IDF recovered 3 hostages, the bodies of 3 hostages that were slain in captivity, meaning they were captured, taken to Gaza, and killed there while in captivity. They could have been released. Hamas could have done the right thing and released them, but why would they? They're barbarians. They're savages. They believe that doing that kind of thing to people is acceptable. It's not. It's literally a war crime. Spelled out very clearly. Right? Holding hostages is a war crime. There's no question about it. It's not a wishy-washy situation. Holding hostages is a war crime. And anybody who's doing it is committing a war crime, which is exactly what they've been doing over there for the past year and 8 months. So when I hear an argument, I'm sort of kidding, but kind of, right? So you get back to the spokesman thing for a second. Like Israel, if it really wants to win the PR war, should be having on spokesmen like Druze Israelis and Arab Israelis who vociferously defend and support Israel, or people like Tal Oren, the traveling cloud, right? Relatively, he's been doing kind of pro-Israel content for the past couple of years since the war began. No reason for him not to be a guest on a lot of these different talk shows and speaking events at Cambridge, etc. Why? Because he's been doing it now for a couple of years, does it pretty well, and represents the Iraqi, the typical stereotypical Iraqi Jew, Jewish American guy who can give you a great case in American English on American media about why Israel is not a country of white colonizers, and why Israel is literally a country that has liberated itself from colonizers, and why Israel is not a colonial settlement of Polish Jews or whatever. It is literally the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, and it represents the fruition of Zionism. But no mainstream media will ever invite people like him onto that show, right? And there's, by the way, there's plenty of other speakers as well who fall in that camp, and there's Ethiopians, and there's people from all over, frankly, the North African and African and Mizrahi and Sephardi world, who again are darker than my white complexion. Although I think it also breaks brain cells when I go onto a show and tell people, yeah, I'm actually an African American, right? Because I'm European, but I'm also African, right? Half my DNA was made in Africa. Sure, 2 white Sephardi Jews maybe, but still, I like to break brain cells because that's the whole point. Is it doesn't fit the mold, it doesn't fit the narrative. Well, that's right. Life doesn't always fit the narrative. The reality is very often different than what people think, and that's exactly what's happening in Israel. The reality is very different than what a lot of people think. So it needs to be expressed. If you're a mainstream media manager and you're trying to book guests, traveling clout. Like, listen, Aaron Mullen is great. and she's wonderful, and it's awesome to have you know, completely non-Jewish Australian woman talking wonderful things about Israel and supporting Israel, because she's speaking from the heart about what's the right thing to do, and I commend that. She's an amazing advocate for Israel, even if I don't agree with her on a lot of other stuff. Okay, there's a lot of conservatives I agree with on their Israel policy, but not a lot of other things, and that's okay. I can disagree very much with, like, Charlie Kirk, for example, on pretty much all of his social policies, okay, internally in the United States. But at the same time, I can also be supportive of his stance on Israel, and that's okay. And we can be civil about it, right? And I don't have to hate on him about it, right? Just because I disagree with him. But the reason that we agree on the Israel issue is not because, oh, he supports Jews, therefore I support him. No. He supports decency. Even if I don't agree with him on his societal views of, you know, what is marriage, or the right for women to choose, or all these other things, or, you know, homosexuality or whatever, all this kind of stuff, right? He supports being decent. Now, uh, to me, that seems like a pretty core fundamental value that a person should have: being decent to each other. You don't need to be any particular religion to understand that. If you do need a religion to get that, there's something wrong with you. You need to have your head checked. Like, it shouldn't take some holy book to tell you to be decent to each other. The fact that it does take holy books to tell certain people, and that those are oftentimes the people who are the most extreme in their views of religion, right? Now, I'm not saying holy books shouldn't contain that. It was great that they do. They were useful guidebooks, especially in a time when people didn't know anything about anything, right? But even then, people knew to be decent to each other. And the point is, most people did not need those guidebooks to tell them to be decent. Those books just codified it so that people would have to be decent to each other, because those were the rules of the road back then. And those rules of the road have been translated into secular versions of those laws. Like, you can't harm people, right? So, anyway, I think you guys get my rant here. I think you understand what I'm talking about. I hope you understand what I'm talking about. There's a lot going on right now in the world. A lot of people not being decent to each other. Unfortunately, war is hell. But not every war is a genocide either. And not every war is an attempt at genocide. Not every war is an attempt at doing something more horrific than the war itself, which is already bad enough. But Israel needs to finish this war. It needs to win it decisively. It needs to get the hostages all back to Israel and wherever else they belong, because there's still one guy from Nepal. Did you know that? There's still a guy from Nepal. In addition to the body they recovered from the Thai guy yesterday, that they recovered a Thai hostage. They recovered 2 others as well. There's still a hostage from Nepal being held, and it's believed he's still alive. Why are they holding a Nepalese hostage after a year and 8 months? What is the point of that? What is the point? Oh, because they're savages. Yeah. And part of the problem with this war ending the way it should, and the unlikelihood that it will, is what Israel recently told what Prime Minister Netanyahu, or the Israeli government, told President Trump recently, when Netanyahu told Trump, Israel won't attack Iran without basically a green light from President Trump, which is a huge problem, because it means that Iran will just drag out their so-called negotiations and lie the whole time about, oh yeah, no, we're negotiating in good faith with the United States, so you can't attack us. And meanwhile, they're going to keep building towards having a bomb. And I'm pretty convinced they already have a bomb or more. But they don't just want one, right? They want to have 20 or 30 or 40 of them, so that Israel can't just take them all out at once. Because again, yes, if they have a bomb, it's bad, but an unarmed bomb isn't going to cause an atomic explosion if it's bombed. But if they have the ability to produce them at any rate, then you need to be able to stop them before they can produce them freely. And once they have one, that's very bad. That's it's already that's it. It's almost game over, right? But if they have 10 or 20 or more, then you have a real problem because that means that they're able to produce them whenever they want at whatever speed they choose. Practically, it's very easy once you get to the point of you have multiple warheads have been produced to produce many more. Of course, it takes a lot of resources. Of course, it takes a lot of material and personnel and know-how and everything else. But once the factory is running, the factory is running. So Israel has to do something probably very kinetic within the coming days. It might be weeks, it might be months, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's something happens in the next few weeks. I really wouldn't be. Maybe even by the end of this month or early July. I would not be surprised. Because we're at that stage now where Iran is aggressively posturing and trying to come back and from the humiliations that they've suffered at the hands of the Israeli Air Force after Iran attacked Israel. Israel defended itself extremely well against the Iranian attacks and then retaliated against Iran by basically obliterating their air defense systems, which were already not something that could take down Israel's offensive assets ability, obviously, because they failed to. And they weren't able to defend against Israel's incoming ordinance. And there have been other things that have happened in Iran. Obviously, if you remember, in the last month or two, there were a number of explosions at random places across Iran that weren't so random, or didn't appear to be. So Israel's doing a lot, right, quietly in the background to destabilize the situation in Iran to make it harder for them to focus on producing nukes. But that is not going to deter them, and Israel knows it. Those are all just like temporary things at best. Very, very, very temporary. Call them successes or victories, whatever you want to call them. They're not long-term strategic victories. The only long-term strategic victory with Iran is that government stops ruling over the people, right? Or wakes up one day and decides, hey, you know what, we should be nice. That's not likely to happen. They're extremist Shiites, right? They're not just, these are Shiite Muslim. No, these are extremists in charge of a massive nation with a lot of resources on the verge of becoming a nuclear power. Officially. That can't happen. But it looks like it will happen if Israel lets Trump decide when Israel can attack Iran, because Trump will probably, now you might think he will, since he told Israel to do whatever they wanted to Hamas, but Israel didn't do whatever to Hamas and didn't finish it quickly like Trump had told them to do. If you remember when Trump came into office the second time, right, he told Israel, Netanyahu, go ahead and do whatever you want, just finish the job quickly. Israel didn't. Israel then had a ceasefire, and Israel then had another more dragged out negotiations, and then Israel started another, bloody phase of the fighting, and with the Hamas, because the Hamas broke the ceasefire, et cetera, et cetera. All these things dragged the thing on and on. And meanwhile, Trump just wants this conflict to be over, whether you like him or not. And whether he, even if he doesn't care one whit about what happens in Israel and the Gazans, I don't think he even cares that much, but he does care enough to want to see the fighting end. To his credit, and I'm not a big Trump fan or something, but to his credit, he wants to see the war end. He thinks what happened on October 7th was terrible, as he said that he's never said anything other than that when it comes to that day, right? And he's always said Hamas are the violent people that started this war, and it can't be. It's not. They're not. It's not tolerate. You can't tolerate a situation where a group like them are constantly going to keep attacking Israel and do it over and over and over again. I mean, he said that. And that's why he told Israel, look, just finish it quickly. Just do it already. And Israel has not, because precisely Israel does not want to just end the lives of people needlessly. And yes, of course, that means that the longer the war drags out, the more endless lives, the more needless deaths there will be. So it's a catch-22 for Israel, right? They're damned if they do, and they're damned if they don't. Sneak in from the southern border by Egypt, like it's hello. Israel controls the border there too on the water line, right? Why? Because it's known that terrorists like to come in through the water as well. That's why there's an Israeli Coast Guard that guards all the way down to the Egyptian border. Okay, that's why. And guess what? There's an Israeli Navy and there's an Egyptian Navy that also, in theory, patrols their own waters. And sure, maybe they'll let Greta Thunberg go right up to the border just to antagonize Israel. Very possibly, but they won't get into the water's edge, right? They'll get arrested. Probably. That's what the IDF said that they're preparing to do. They said they're preparing to arrest them if they come into water that is controlled by Israel. So, but expect more of those kind of idiotic stunts to happen there and elsewhere. There's this march to Gaza, from people who are going to start marching somewhere in Egypt, and they're going to hope to march across the Sinai Peninsula and take about like a week of marching in June or July. I think it's in June, and then march all the way to the border of Gaza. If you've never been to the Sinai in June and you're not from a hot country, it might be a little uncomfortable walking through that part of the world for about a week. You might find yourself a little bit uncomfortable. But hey, knock your socks off. Go to the border of Gaza. See what happens when you get to the Egyptian border with Gaza. Good luck. See what happens. See if the Egyptians will allow you in. and then see if you'll get in past the Israeli security, which is there to protect civilians and get rid of the terrorists. And then see what happens if the Israelis actually do let you in and you actually do get into Gaza. See what will happen. See how much you'll enjoy being there. You think you're going to create a human corridor? Like, what does that even mean? You think you're just going to keep the gate open between Israel or Gaza and Egypt? Guess what? Israel would love that, actually. Israel would love if the people would flow out of Gaza, go into Egypt. But guess who doesn't want that? Egypt. Even though many, many, many people, even the majority of people living in Gaza today, trace their roots like 1 and 2 and 3 generations ago to Egypt. Like the vast majority of people in Gaza came from Egypt. The vast majority. Not a 51%. No. Like more than 2/3 of the people in Gaza today, either they themselves or their parents or their grandparents or their great-grandparents were Egyptians. And in fact, anybody that was there until 1967 was Egyptian because it was Egypt. It was British Mandate Palestine for some time, but it was Egyptian. The Egyptians lived there. The Egyptians went there to work in British Mandate Palestine, and they were all Egyptians. They weren't considered Palestinians. They were Egyptians. Right? Many of them even have the name the Egyptian, Al-Masri, right? That's literally what their family name. Which, okay, you could say, well, whatever, family names don't mean anything. I could be the Egyptian, but I could be born in Ecuador or something. Sure, that's true. But in the case of people living in the same place that they've been in for 50 years, 70 years, 100 years, and they came from Egypt, where there were no cars 120 years ago, 130 years ago. They were, were walking, right? They weren't traveling the world in airplanes, right? They were from where their names were, right? It's not like today where people can just travel around easily and be from anywhere. Even though, yeah, you could travel by boat, but most people didn't, especially people who were like migrant workers who walked from Egypt to Gaza in order to work in British Mandate Palestine for the British, for Jews, and for other Arabs, right? The successful ones who there happened to be a bunch of successful Arab merchants, for example, who set up a bunch of businesses that provided food and things like that for the British. So they were there, and they were, and they had a bunch of, they were doing construction work. They had a bunch of construction workers who were living in Gaza to this day, right? And agricultural work was nothing like it is today, but there were some agricultural workers living in Gaza who would work inside of British Mandate Palestine. Again, most of the people in Gaza came from Egypt. Yes, some of them also came from other places, like inside of British Mandate Palestine. Some of them, and they came from Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, or Transjordan, which before was actually British Mandate, which also was British Mandate Palestine, right? Until the Balfour Declaration said that it would actually be, that would all become the Jewish state. All of what is Jordan today and all of what is Israel today was supposed to become the Jewish state. And then after the Balfour Declaration, the British changed that and said, actually, we're going to give away 80% of that land to the Arabs. We're going to pick the Hashemite family to control the Bedouins of this area, the east of the Jordan River, and we're going to call that Transjordan. Meaning the Jordan River, like the other side across Jordan, the Jordan River. So British Mandate Palestine, Transjordan, meaning across the Jordan River to the east of the Jordan River, would become the Hashemite kingdom. And who were the Hashemites? The Hashemites came from Saudi Arabia. And they were not exactly peaceful people. And they took over Transjordan, which today is just called Jordan. The same place. It was all supposed to be Israel. It was all supposed to be the land for the Jews. Israel, in that one move, gave up 80% of the land. Not that the Jews had a choice. The Jews didn't have a state at the time, right? And they said, okay, fine, whatever. Can we just have a piece of land, something to call home? And the British said, fine, you can take the 20% west of the Jordan River. Israel said, fine. And then the British and the international community said, but actually, we're only going to give you about 55% of that. We're going to give the other 45%, the most fertile parts with the highest ground that is actually on your literal ancestral homeland in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza. We're going to give all that to the Arabs. And the Jews said, fine, we don't care. We bought land in the crappy parts of the country. We don't mind. That'll be our country. Fine, we'll accept it. Can we have a state, please? Can we please just have a state? And the international community said finally in 1947, yes, you can have a state. The United Nations voted to partition the land, to give 45% to the Arabs, 45% of what is the map of Israel today, yeah? 45% of that land to give to the Arabs. They said this will be Palestine, and the other 55% to the Jews. But you got to remember the 45% was the more fertile part, higher ground, everything better strategically speaking. The only difference is they didn't have coastline except for Gaza. Well, they did have coastline in Gaza. But they had the heart of everything. They had the heart of the land, the higher ground, everything you would want if you were starting a state nascent. That would be the state of Palestine. The Arabs said no. We don't want Jews living here at all. We want all the land. We don't accept partition. Even though the Arabs living there who had bought land before from the Ottoman Empire, right? The Arabs living there sold their land to the Jews. Sold it, title deed, everything. The Jews legally owned it under the Ottoman system, under the British Mandate system. They legally owned the land. Nobody will argue that. No, people do today because they're idiots, but nobody who actually was involved in those transactions would argue that land was bought and paid for. Israel bought and paid for some of the worst land in Israel and turned it into some of the most amazing land you've ever seen. That's just a fact. You can hate that all you want. That's a fact. Israel did not displace those Arabs. Those Arabs sold their land willingly. They weren't under duress or anything. There was no state of Israel to put them under duress. They sold that land to Jews. Right? They didn't sell it to Israelis because Israel didn't exist as a state at that time. They sold it to Jews, Jewish pioneers who came to Israel to build a new state. And the Arabs just rejected the idea of a state of Israel. Anyway, I know I'm deep diving into this whole thing. It's been a long time, this video. But to remind you that this conflict goes way back, but the part that's been lasting the last year and 8 months, needs to end. And it has deep historical roots, but there are practical ways forward. And we do need to see the enemy as human beings, because they are. We do need to understand that the Palestinians aren't going anywhere. Like, we're not just going to get rid of them all, okay? But that doesn't mean we have to accept Hamas's existence or in its current form, right? It can change. It can put down its radicalism. If you think an organization can't, it can. If they refuse to put down their radicalism, then they need to be de-Hamasified. Just like the Nazis were Germany was denazified, right? The Palestinian people need to be de-Hamasified because they hold the same exact hateful ideologies that literally the Nazis had. They literally teach that stuff in their schools. Like, not, oh, it's a little similar. No, they actually teach like the teachings of the Nazi Party in their schools, and Palestinian schools have been teaching that since World War II. Because Haj Amin al-Husseini was a Nazi. He was a very dear friend of Hitler and was trying to implement the same concentration camp extermination idea of Jews right here in Palestine, right? British Mandate Palestine. He was hoping to do that. He was like, after the Nazis kill all the Jews in Europe, guess what? You can bring over your horrors to the land of Palestine and kill all the Jews there. That literally was their plan. They had plans to build concentration camps across Israel and put Jews in Israel in concentration camps and kill all the Jews here. Like, not even a joke. And they teach that same garbage in their schools today. To this day, right now, during the war and everything. Holocaust denial. On the one hand, they teach Holocaust denial, which is like weirdly ironic, because if the Nazis didn't kill 6 million Jews with concentration camp horrors and everything else, why are you saying that you need to do it again? You want to commit a Holocaust that you say commit a Holocaust again that you say wasn't committed in the first place. Their logic doesn't logic. Anyway, the useful idiots are just useful idiots. I'm not going to say pay no mind to them, but don't let them take your eye off the ball if you're involved in this fight one way or the other. Remember Israel to bring on people who are better spokespeople for you. People who break the mold, right? Either white Sephardi like me, right? White Sephardi Ashkenazi mixes like me, who break the mold because we don't check all the boxes, or we check literally all the boxes and freak them out. And then they're like, wait, what? You're a what and a what and a what and a what? Why? How are you all these things? I am. What do you want? Or do the more obvious thing, because visually it's very easy. Bring on people who are actually brown or black as spokespeople for Israel. Because guess what? They represent the majority of the population in Israel. the majority, not a little bit, 60%. And more than 60% are non-white. More than 60%, if you include Asians and other people, Latin Americans and whatever, non-white. Israel is non-white. Yes, there's a white minority. Yes, it's a very, it's a minority that has a great impact on the country historically and to this day. But it's a minority. And the story of Israel is not just about a white monolithic group of people who came from Europe to colonize this place. No, Jews came from around the world to liberate our land against the occupiers, right? We liberated it from the occupiers, who at the time were the British, but before that were the Ottomans, and before that, for hundreds of years, there were Arabs who were occupying this place. And before that, there were Romans who were occupying this place. And in between, there were different groups of people. And before that, there were Persians and Greeks, and a lot of people have occupied this land. No group of people has been here incessantly for 3,000 years or more other than the Jewish people. The people that were here before the Jews, they don't exist anymore. The Canaanites, gone. Calcoliths, gone. But the Jews are still here. This is our homeland. We are indigenous. Right? Jews did not come and conquer this land from somewhere else. Abraham came here. He wasn't Jewish. He was the first Hebrew. And he came here not with a force, not with an army, not with a band of fighters. He came here by himself with his family. Set up shop, grew his family. His family grew and grew and grew. Eventually, after generations and generations of Hebrews, right? The whole story of the Israelites went to Egypt. He came back. Abraham gave them the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. Came into the land of Israel. And the kingdoms of Judah was set up. The kingdom of Israel was set up. Right? Jews are from Judea. Judea and Israel are closely tied together forever because Jews are from Judea. Israel and Judah, both Jewish tribes. They were both Hebraic tribes. The kingdom of Israel was a Jewish kingdom. So, anyway, folks, hopefully we can see peace sooner rather than later. Till the next one, I bid you all a wonderful day. Peace.